This is the story of a love affair. You're all mine. Ooh, darling, you're all mine. Ooh, my love will always be.
Yo, JUVIE, what's good, dude? What is up? What is up? What is up?
Nothing much, man. Just cleaning up right now, actually. Just been chilling,
you know? Yeah, that's cool or whatever,
Yeah.
but have you seen Terrifier 2? I just watched it recently.
I did.
Movie. It's a movie for sure.
This is the story of a love affair.
Okay, by no means do I mean Terrifier 2 is a perfect movie.
Why can't you just believe me? Because.
Huh? This movie rejects the new postmodern elevated horror style that has become the norm for horror movies in the last few years. This movie really doesn't have much to say on a quote-unquote deep level, and while this usually takes away from just about every other movie besides Terrifier 2, and by extension Terrifier, both are able to remove theme at no cost to Damien Leone's raw talent of scaring the shit out of the viewer. And while other movies try to capture the same campy tone, they end up failing because of a focus on jokes that take away tension from the antagonists. But luckily, Terrifier 2 has David Howard Thornton's performance as Art the Clown. Art is like a force of nature not to be fucked with, and you feel his presence in every scene he's in. Despite Art being literally the most terrifying horror slasher we have seen, David Howard Thornton is able to make you find Art somewhat entertaining, further fusing the physical comedy and body horror, creating this campy, silly, yet horrific tone, putting Terrifier 2 closer to an 80s schlocky slasher rather than a slow burn elevated horror movie. But that does not mean that this movie has a bad story or even bad characters. The story of Terrifier 2 is quite a doozy, and I'm going to attempt to explain it very quickly. I actually have notes. The first scene of Terrifier 2 is actually the ending scene of Terrifier. Art kills the coroner and Go washes his clothes. We get introduced to Terrifier 2, which I don't want to talk about because I don't fully understand it, if I'm being fully honest. And then he disappears for a year. Start to the actual movie. We meet our new lead, Sienna, who's working on a Halloween costume that serves as a tribute to their father who had killed himself. We don't really know much about the father. He's kind of a plot thing, so let's just ignore that for now. The costume itself is this winged warrior type beat that Sienna's father used to draw her as when she was a child. And before his passing, Sienna's father gave her this blade that she is now using to accessorize the costume with. And yes, the blade comes back later, so just remember that for now. After this point, we get introduced to Sienna's family. She has a mother, or as they call her throughout the whole movie, Mommy. I don't know why. But anyway, Sienna's mother is actually a life insurance agent, which I thought was pretty funny. Other than that, her character traits consist of not believing her children and downplaying mental illness. She's a walking L. Then we meet her brother Jonathan, who's shy and kind of odd. He likes serial killers and has an interest in art because of his late father's notebook that has a bunch of drawings of him and the murders that happened. Cut to later that night where Sienna falls asleep watching an ad for the Clown Cafe, and as she falls asleep, she wakes up in a nightmare that is the Clown Cafe. Oh my god! And just when you think this dream can't get any worse, yep, there's Art the Clown, and he lit those people on fire, killed those guys, and there's Uwe Boll there also. This is a real fucking nightmare. And just when we think Sienna's gonna die to Art's big flamethrower, she actually digs through a big box and finds the dad's blade and blocks the flames. And oh my god, when she wakes up, the wings are on fire. What the fuck is even happening? She brushes off the dream as a nightmare and decides to go to a Halloween party with her friends Allie and Brooke. Silly Sienna, you can't go to a Halloween party with a burnt pair of wings. You gotta go get some new ones. So she goes to a big Halloween store, the same one that Art the Clown chooses to go to, and they bump heads, of course. This is the funniest scene in the movie, by the way. If you try to fight me on this, you're wrong. I don't care. But this isn't the scene where Art attacks her, so she leaves scot-free. He actually kills the cashier. After doing that, Art goes trick-or-treating and knocks right on Allie's door, killing her, surprisingly, in one of the most mean-spirited scenes of the movie, but we'll talk about that later. That is something for another day. Art also kills Allie's mom. I forgot to mention that. Sorry. Completely unaware, Sienna and Brooke still go to the Halloween party that they were planning to go to. Oh yeah, and Brooke's boyfriend's there, another kind of non-character.
We do not care.
Meanwhile, while all this is happening, Jonathan is trying to convince his mom that Art and his dead father have a connection, but the mom doesn't believe him, just like she didn't believe Sienna earlier. The convo ends up leading to child abuse, not poggers. Jonathan, as a result, runs away. Sienna is still partying, having a jolly good time. You know, not worried. While Jonathan is away, the mother calls Sienna and informs her that her car has been vandalized by someone who she thinks is Jonathan, but is probably Art. After the conversation with Sienna, she attempts to clean the car, but has a brain blast and figures out who did it. Surprise, it's fucking Art the Clown. After the conversation with her mother, Sienna is having visions of Terrifier 2 on the dance floor, leading to a mental breakdown, which is not very poggers when you're on Molly. While this is happening, Jonathan is in the midst of running away and sees Terrifier 2 in a van and decides to run back home to see dinner's ready, and guess who's serving it? It's Art the Clown, baby. Cut back to Sienna. She is being driven home after her big whoopsies when she gets a call from her brother asking her to pick him up from an abandoned amusement park. Upon arrival, Sienna goes looking for Jonathan in a maze called the Terrifier, leaving Brooke and her boyfriend alone in the car. Art finds them and kills the boyfriend via a penis stab and drags Brooke out of the car, stabbing her with the glass on the way out. Brooke manages to escape and runs directly into the Terrifier, where she is cornered and then promptly murdered by Art the Clown. Sienna finds the aftermath and Art, and they share a little moment together. Jonathan wakes up, distracting both of them, and Sienna uses this as a chance to get an upper hand and escape. But Sienna's victory doesn't last long, as she gets the complete shit kicked out of her, and Art goes to find Jonathan again. Does manage to find Jonathan and begins to slash him. And of course, she gets up and stops him again. But Sienna and Jonathan try to find a way out, and then they decide to split up, which was one of the dumbest part of the movie, which obviously leaves Jonathan vulnerable to Art finding him again. And yeah, he finds him again. And of course, Sienna whips right back around to kick Art's fucking ass. But Art gets the upper hand and begins to whip her, but Sienna grabs the whip and begins to whip that motherfucker back, and that shit surprises him. The fight ends with Art being stabbed in the head, but this doesn't kill Art, as he just springs back to fucking life and chokes Sienna. Jonathan spots Art's ankle pistol and uses it to finally put down Art. After being thoroughly choked, Sienna wakes up to see her mother, JK, it's Terrifier 2, who shows her mother's death, and that leads to another mental breakdown, which lets Art, who's awake again, get her brother once more, which means Sienna has to kill this motherfucker one more time. After another scuffle, Art throws her into a pit of some kind, and in that pit, Sienna finds a doorway on the ground, and after a quick stab, Art throws her into it. Sienna wakes up in her nightmare from earlier in the movie, but this time she's underwater in a box and cannot escape. Just when it looks like Sienna's about to drown, she gets connected to the blade somehow, and it heals her to 100%. I don't really understand it. Meanwhile, while this is happening, Art is getting a little snack courtesy of Jonathan. To Art's surprise, Sienna wakes up, blade in hand, and cuts his fucking head off, finally killing Art for the last time in this movie, or so you think until you see the fucking end credits. Sienna goes to comfort Jonathan and spots Terrifier 2 picking up Art's head and taking it. They don't really care and continue to hug and comfort each other, and then the movie draws to a close, and then there's a end credit scene where Art's head gets reborn from the survivor of the first movie. But that's not really that important to what I'm talking about here. And as you see, this movie definitely has a story and definitely has some sort of theme about mental illness throughout, evidenced by Sienna's dad going insane and killing himself, Sienna being on a mood stabilizer.
I put a pinch of Molly in her drink. It was nothing.
Plus Xanax.
What? I did not give you Xanax. No, she was already on Xanax.
And then Jonathan's whole like kind of obsession with serial killers.
Mom, do you ever wonder about Jonathan? He was looking up serial killers when I went in his room before. Now he's talking about I mean, it's just a phase, Sienna.
But honestly, I could just be reading into it too much. And obviously this movie isn't Hereditary. This movie isn't focusing on a central theme, but it's still there to make the main characters more likable and believable. Unlike the first movie that has paper cutouts of people in comparison. Terrifier 2 is basically a beefed up 80s slasher in comparison to all the elevated horror that's been coming out in recent memory. But just because Damien Leone managed to update an 80s slasher doesn't mean he innovated it. This movie still falls into a lot of the pitfalls that 80s slashers have, one of those being the glacial pacing. Now I know the recap I just did might have been like 4 or 5 minutes to you guys. The movie's 2 hours long. I cut out so much extraneous shit. And look, I love Laurie Strode and Jack it's Kevin Bacon's character from Friday the 13th. I tried to look it up, but I don't want to pronounce that name. Fuck that. And look, I love those guys as much as the next guy, but let's not lie about the structure of an 80s slasher. It's pretty much just a vibe plus guy murdering people, meaning the energy of the movie can sometimes grind to a halt in order to catch up with some character that the movie forgot about for the last 20 minutes. And Terrifier 2 does have that problem. It is 2 hours long, which is just way too much time spent on some scenes, and especially the whole ending. I feel like you could chop out like 20 minutes, and this sucks because Sienna has way more agency to kill Art than Laurie Strode with Michael. You know, because she has a connection with Art from her fucking dad, like it was prophesized and shit, but they don't even fight or really interact until the 3rd act of the movie. She doesn't even know that Allie's dead and only knows her mother died during the last fight with Art. For as well as Damien Leone wrote Sienna and this almost background story, it just kind of crawls to the end instead of being this all-out rush to kill Art the Clown, which would have added so much energy to the 3rd act of this movie. And with those minor changes, I think this movie would be way more of an improvement over Terrifier 1, because Terrifier 1 is much like Halloween that uses the random killing as a way to make Art scarier, and in this movie they already set out to kind of mythicize Art, if that's a word. And if you want to do that in your squeakquel, you can't have the same story structure and bloated runtime. Despite me having a problem with the story structure and the pacing, these are what make Terrifier 2 feel like a movie ripped out of the 80s and made now. What also helps this movie in its authenticity is its tone. Just like Toxic Avenger or any other slashy, sleazy 80s slasher, that was a lot of S's, this movie has a mean streak. Like, let's be honest, did Allie need bleach or salt? I don't think she needed any of that. And yes, this movie is way better than the first film in this regard. Do you guys remember like the homeless lady subplot? And well, that's not for me. It is something that makes a schlocky movie feel schlocky. And yeah, this movie kind of nails that perfectly if you didn't know. Well, maybe not perfectly, may I say, but this imperfectly perfect tone is what makes Terrifier 2 feel like one of those movies that you would watch on HBO late night. And why, despite the problems with this movie, I'm gonna go on record and say Terrifier 2 is the ultimate slasher, even when and if Terrifier 3 comes out, because this movie's brand of gore was able to shake us jaded horror vets and give us a similar feeling to what it must have felt like to watch Friday the 13th or Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time in theaters. This movie resonated with people much like The Greats did, which is something you really don't see anymore. Terrifier 2 was an Indiegogo project that made $13 million. If that doesn't scream new classic, I really don't know what else does. Not only did Terrifier 2 manage to shock and scare us in a new but old way, it managed to be a decent upgrade over the first movie. Sienna as a new lead for the series is a welcome addition. She is very likable and is very capable of beating Art, and has a compelling backstory because of this mystical connection to the thing, Art. It's kinda giving Nancy versus Freddy TBH. And if the Terrifier series keeps going in this direction, I think I won't be the only one calling this a new classic slasher.
Damn, that's crazy. I hated it. I thought it was dog shit. I couldn't stand a second of it, honestly.
What the fuck?
I guess today you